So thank you very much. My name's Matthew Charles Jones, and I feel that I've been invited really to tell a little bit of a story about what we're doing in Yackandandah, and subsequent to that, how that's managed to influence some of the thinking that's happened at a regional level. So thank you very much for inviting me in, and I actually feel like it's a real privilege to be here amongst you, and that privilege for me is about what I witness, and I know lots of others, no doubt you as well, around a real yearning about recreating the way we live with the natural world. And it just so happens in Yackandandah we've been doing quite a lot of thinking and playing around with what that means in terms of electricity. And as you know very well, given your interest, is how effective community energy is and how effective renewable energy systems are at putting power back into the people. And I think what it's doing is, and you've heard the word millions of times, leading to a quite remarkable disruption in the way that electricity is being conceived of, delivered, and not more importantly, but very importantly, the business models that sit around that. So I think what I'm going to hope to do this evening is tell a bunch of stories to give you a little bit of insight into the personal nature of what we're doing in Yackandandah, and then extend that to how that's being interpreted at a network level and a policy and procedure and legislation level. And there's a whole lot of new things going on. I don't pretend to be an expert on electricity or the engineering dimensions of that, but I think I've got some ideas and thoughts, and I'd love to play around with those and hear your thoughts as we proceed today. So feel free to stop me, question me. I'd like to introduce Tash Chapman up the back there, and Tash is also here from Mondo Power, and Tash's particular area of interest is more on the western side of Melbourne, Geelong, the Barwon area, and thinking about how electricity can be transformed really to take advantage of the opportunity of renewable energy and all of the things that adds value to. So thank you, and please feel free to stop me and we'll see where we end up. So in 2014, I was working for the local council, Indigo Shire Council, and they'd raised some money through a state government grant, Climate Communities, to be able to examine what the renewable energy resources were in the Indigo Shire. And quite simply, that was examining the solar irradiance, examining the wind resource, examining the water, and any of the other less common ways of generating electricity, and seeing how they fitted into the nature of the existing grid. And at the end of that, there was a little bit of a thought as to what do we do with this knowledge. We now know what the resources are, how do we use it, and probably it tells the story of one of the big challenges you've maybe been aware of for a long time, that renewable energy technologies, distributed energy systems and resources provide an enormous opportunity. How do we use that opportunity to create something new that works for people and for places? So, did that just change? It did. One of the things that I did at the end of that grant money was ran a community energy forum in each of the towns around Indigo Shire. And in March 2014 we ran one in Indigo. And in a small country town on a Sunday we drew a full hall. And out of that full hall we got together 30 people from Yackandandah who were really interested in seeing some big changes, some big thoughts, some big ideas being played with. And Totally Renewable Yackandandah formed out of that forum. And so in 2014 we had a formal launch, and this was it here. And that formal launch followed some incorporation and some policies and procedures, all that normal boring stuff that a new community group does. And the building that we were standing in front of there was also a community centre, it is still a community centre, that had also received some grant money to be able to improve their energy performance. And so they stuck on 6 kilowatts of solar, they added cladding, they put some double glazing on, we changed the lights, we did a whole other range of things. So that our launch also happened at the same time as the community centre there. In actual fact, that wasn't the first community activity in renewables in Yackandandah. In 2007, the museum in Yackandandah burnt down, and it burned down as a result of an electrical fault of the neighbouring property. But in the process of rebuilding, the museum committee made a decision to really think carefully about the thermal performance of the building and the energy efficiency, and so they put in the best lighting they could get. They insulated well. They, at the end of it, put solar panels on and did a whole range of other things. So that was one dimension of the community energy already in place. The other is in Yackandandah. There's an organisation which is about 15 years old called the Yackandandah Community Development Company, and that was the result of the petrol station closing down and a group of local people deciding that was a little bit of concern, and obviously if people started buying petrol elsewhere, there's a natural flow on for a small community. And so there is already an existing energy company in Yackandandah. They own the petrol station and now run a hardware store and a rural supplies, and they are an unlisted public company, and they distribute something like $20,000 a year to community for buying books at the kindergarten or at the school, or they funded the solar panels on the museum, and on it goes. So that's a little bit of the background of Yackandandah. It'd be fair to say that Yackandandah is quite a, like lots of country towns, quite a creative and innovative and self-sufficient town, in so much as people are prepared to get in and make things happen. So in 2014, Totally Renewable Yackandandah settled on a goal of being 100% renewable by 2022. And our goal is to be gross 100%. So it means all of the electricity we use in Yackandandah, we generate locally. Now, it would be fair to say there's going to be some people in Yackandandah who aren't interested, don't want to buy in, and that's fine. We'll just make sure we generate enough electricity to cover their needs. So we're pretty clear that at this stage in 2014, our goal was still very much something of a group of enthusiasts rather than an ambition owned by a town. And so we spent probably a year, maybe 18 months, doing lots of this type of activity here. But it also looked like holding a table at the public market, the farmers market each month, putting a table on the footpath out the front of the newsagent on a Saturday, out the front of the supermarket. We would stand up at community meetings, so the garden club and the cemetery club and the Lions Club and so forth, and we just kept telling the story. And really, I suppose what we were trying to do was normalise what it is we were aiming for, offer people the perspective that it's already happening elsewhere, particularly in other parts of the world, maybe not so much in Australia. And it was something that was ambitious but achievable. I don't know whether any of you recognise the person in the photo there. It's a gentleman by the name of Soren Hermansen, and I'm just going to, yep. It's this fella here. And Soren's a really very interesting chap, and he comes from a little island in Denmark called Sanso. And the beautiful part of him visiting Yackandandah is that in 2007, the island on which he lives became 100% renewable. And so they won a prize 3 or 4 years before 2007, and that prize was to get some government support. And it wasn't so much financial support, it was just practical support, ideas, some expertise and so forth to become 100%. And the really interesting thing about that little island of Sanso is that they got to their 100% in 2007, and then the question happens, well, what do we do with energy now? And it's really interesting to hear him talking, because it's now no longer just talking about electricity, it's talking about transitioning all of their cars to electricity. It's about converting their car ferry to biodiesel. It's about organic agriculture right across the island. They export electricity from their wind farms and on it goes. So they're very much a net exporter of energy.
Which island is that, please?
Sanso.
S-A-N?
S-A-N-S-O.
Where is it?
It's just off the coast of Denmark.
Oh, Denmark.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So pretty exciting, and as it happens, this is kind of a relevant point, but this gentleman here lives in Yackandandah. His name is Ben. He runs a company called the Agency of Sculpture, and the Agency of Sculpture has built a sculpture that sits at the ferry terminal to go out to Sanso Island. So they have a nice little link there. And the story goes they went out and had red wine that night and then went fishing at 2 o'clock in the morning. They didn't say they caught any fish.
No, while you're changing the slide, there's a little red button on that is the laser point.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. So those were the conversations we had. We went to community groups, we went to stalls, we went to markets, and so forth. The other thing we did was we put some thought into who were the types of people that were using lots of electricity. One of those groups is this building here. It's the Yackandandah Health Service. It was previously a bush nursing hospital, and it's now a community-owned facility. And we went along to one of their board meetings and floated the idea about what it was we were intending to do. But at that time, in sort of mid to late 2014, we had no idea how we were going to do it. So we went and presented this grand ambition to them and their board meeting, and essentially we walked out feeling a bit silly because we had this idea but we didn't know how we were going to do it. But they were really interested. We were able to offer some ideas around changing light globes, improving thermal performance of their glazing and so forth. But about 6 months later, they rang us, and we gave them some information about contractors and people who might do a good job installing and get 3 quotes and all of the rest of it. And about 6 months later, they said, we've just signed a contract and we're installing 99 kilowatts of solar on the roof, and we're lowering the roof of our main building, and we're changing the times that we're doing our laundry, and we're changing all our lighting to LED, and on it went. And I suppose what it demonstrated, and we've seen it quite a lot, there's this incubation that takes place when an idea gets floated from when the idea is absorbed until some action takes place. And really interestingly now, they had that installed in February of 2016, and they've halved their power bill. They'll pay it off in 4 years, and with the money that they've saved from their power bill, and I'm just trying to work out where it is here. This building here is a GP service, and the GP service was run by a private medical practice in Wodonga, but they were closing down the Yackandandah facility because it wasn't making enough money. So clearly they've now got $35,000 in their pocket, which is now what they operate the GP service with. And so for us it provided a really dramatic graphic demonstration about what happens when you're spending so much money on electricity and instead spend it on something else, and in their case providing a good health service, which of course is crucial in any community. So that's the Yackandandah Community Health Service. Interestingly, they're now going on to a whole range of other building developments. They're thinking about innovative housing. They're going to combine housing that suits older folks, but at the same time young families, people who are professionals. The intention being you've got a really diverse mix of people in well thought through housing that's energy efficient, and it has solar panels and all the other things you might think of for forward-thinking planning. They've rethought their waste streams, they've rethought the way they're using gas, on and on it goes. So pretty interesting transition underway there. So the other organisation we knew that we needed to go and spend some time with is North East Water. And as you would know, all the water authorities across Victoria are required to meet 100% carbon pledge. And the idea being by 2050, all water authorities must be able to deliver their water services with a zero carbon footprint. And so we went into, myself and the co-chair, whose name is also Matt, went into the CEO's office and sat down and told them about our lovely plan, again with no idea about how we were going to achieve it. And same thought really, we walked away thinking, well, that was useful, and we felt a bit silly. But probably about 9 months later, I got a call from the Director of Operations saying, oh, can we have a cup of coffee? And then this news story evolved about, actually we're working with an organisation called the Intelligent Water Network, and the purpose of the Intelligent Water Network is to help all of the technical people at the water authorities to transition their water services to a low carbon future. And North East Water was the organisation they wanted to work with first, and we'd offered them an opportunity to do a pilot with a supportive community and a bigger story about energy. And so the end result is this installation you see here. That's 40 kilowatts of solar, and on the other side of the raw water storage you see there is 43 kilowatt hours of batteries. And so before they started installing that, they did a whole lot of what they were calling energy optimisation activities. They were changing pumps, soft start pumps. They got rid of a big old water air compressor, which they were activating valves with, and they changed them to electric valves. And so they did a whole lot of things like that. And what was forecast to be something in the realm of a $400,000 or $500,000 spend on solar batteries to meet the need came down to something in the realm of $180,000. So a big saving was made there. So that was turned on in November of last year, and they're now have just had some research done by RMIT examining what now that they've got the experience of how it's performing, what would be the best type of installation, the size of battery, solar, how do they optimise drawdown on the battery and so forth. And they're really quite close, something in the realm of 9 months of being able to supply water to Yackandandah, the potable water to Yackandandah on solar and battery, but then they're needing to do a little drawdown. And interestingly, in a visit they made to the board of North East Water, they made a visit there just the other day, and they were saying they're getting ready to install an inline water hydro generator, because the water that feeds that raw water storage there all comes down under gravity, and at the moment they have to constrict it to manage the flow. And they're planning now, instead of constricting it, using the generator and filling this raw water storage after the evening peak, so they'll allow their electricity from the battery to be used in the grid, and then they'll pump it back up again with the inline generator. So pretty interesting stuff. The water authorities are doing a bit of work with it's common for their retailer to be Flow Energy, and they've got a device called a K-Watch, which is just a monitoring control device, and they're preparing to install that there to help optimise the way the energy is being used and pick various algorithms to make it more efficient. North East Water is also examining how they're going to apply electronic metering, and using the device that Mondo Power has got, it's possible to just apply a little toggle over on the meter, and then you can register all of that digitally. Hello. So the other thing that obviously there's a whole bunch of other things that have happened. Last year, Try, in partnership with Mondo Power, did a solar bulk buy, and there's lots of them going on at the moment, so it's probably a familiar concept to you. The actual focus area of Totally Renewable Yackandandah is a 12-kilometre radius, and that 12-kilometre radius has 1,100 properties, and it's around 2,225 people or thereabouts. And we did a bulk buy last year, and we sold about 550 kilowatts of solar All of them were enabled with a control device, which I'll talk about in a little while, called an UBI. And of those 550 kilowatts, there was about 100 or so that were also coupled with batteries that were subsidised by Mondo Power. That was 14 houses. So that was what we spent a lot of time and effort on last year. This year we've just concluded a solar hot water bulk buy, and the system we were working with is an Apricus, which is probably familiar to you. And we were really just playing around with what the opportunity was there, and we're still waiting for the final results. We've got about 40 systems likely, but our intention, once we've got all of those settled down, is to roll out a hot water bulk buy right across the region of Hume, but it'll be not only solar hot water, it'll be a choice of heat pumps as well.
What size storage is on that?
That one, 315 litres. Yeah. So Apricus is just about to start importing a heat pump which has a similar performance to a Sandon. And the good thing about it is that Apricus has started incorporating their control technology with Mondo and UBI, so that you'll be able to use excess generation to plug straight in to the hot water system. And that obviously brings a whole lot of value, because you don't get the value you need from an export, but it also provides quite a network service that if you can divert excess generation into hot water, you get a physical storage rather than a volt problem in the network.
Those heat pumps that Apricus are bringing in, are they similar output to the Japanese one?
The Sandon? Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, really similar. Yeah.
And they can work at fairly low kilowatts?
Yep. Yeah. So the Sandon relies on 900 watts. Its draw is 900 watts. So you can use a normal 10 amp plug.
So they're producing a similar one, are they? In the same ones?
A similar one, yeah, that's right. Yeah. I don't know whether you're aware that there's a terrific organisation down in Morwell called Earthworker Co-op. Have you heard of them? They're building hot water tanks for Apricus and other water systems, and the beauty is that they've got an old coal engineering shed and they've repurposed it, and it's now a cooperative employment arrangement, and they bring in old boilermakers from the coal industry, and obviously they're really good at what they do, but maybe now looking for a different job. So really nice work they're doing now.
It's called Earthworker?
Earthworker Co-op. Yeah. Earthworkers. Yeah. So that's the hot water service. It's got a particular relevance as well why we've bothered, and obviously if we can give people more efficient hot water service, that has all sorts of value in terms of cost to the user, but also reducing carbon emissions. There's another important service that we have seen with the work we've done and getting UBI control devices right across Yackandandah, is we've now got some real problems with voltage during the day, because we're generating so much electricity in the middle of the day. But the other part is we don't have natural gas in Yackandandah, so we're very heavily dependent on electricity to heat hot water. So we've got a problem with over voltage in the middle of the day, and we've got a problem with under voltage, especially on some of the small swirl lines overnight, 2 o'clock in the morning. And so we're really starting to experiment. If we can reduce the voltage dip at night time, we do all the things that does. It means people save money and reduce carbon emissions by using solar hot water or steam or heat pumps. But it also means that we can re-tap all of the transformers, and it means that we can shift the whole curve up, and it means we can take a higher level of export into the grid from everyone's solar electric. So,
can you? It sounded good, but my brain didn't entirely get what you did.
yeah. So all of the transformers on top of poles have to be adjusted to manage the lowest dip in voltage and the best they can do with the highest peak of voltage. So if you can lift this dip, you can also lift the peak.
What's lifting the peak do?
So it means that, good question. So one of the known problems of high uptake of solar electricity is that you're feeding a lot of electricity into a system that's only really designed to take electricity from big monolithic generation sources to points of use, households, businesses, industry. So that's great, but now that we've all been enabled with these solar electricity systems, we're pushing a spike in the network, and everybody's, and it started happening in Yackandandah when we were getting to the end of our bulk buy. Everyone's inverters were shutting down because they were only able to export up to 253 volts in the line, and once you got above that, they cut down. So everyone's inverters were cutting out.
So you're saying the way that it has like an ampage limit or whatever, and the way that it puts extra in is to up the voltage?
Yes. Yep, and so essentially, and it's an expensive and difficult thing to get right. They essentially go and turn a bolt on the transformer, and it allows the transformer to take.
I'm one of these ignorant people who just thinks we always get 240 when we plug something in, but I know it's not quite the same.
I like the analogy of the electricity network kind of being like a water network, in that it's almost like you've got a pipe and you can only put a certain amount of water down the pipe before the pressure becomes too much and the pipe bursts. It's a similar kind of thing.
Oh yeah. I know about that problem with solar, but I wasn't aware of it, that you actually put more extra in more energy through by lifting up. I understand that the voltage is higher, that puts more energy on the kilowatts. I know that bit, but I didn't know that was one of the methods of it.
Yeah, and so what it's meant is we can now retap the transformers to a higher level because we're starting to take out some of the dip. We're still early days with that to understand.
So you're using the idiosyncrasies of the current grid and trying to take advantage of what's there and adapt it as you can.
Absolutely.
Very, very intelligent.
Did you try and balance by having east and west facing solar panels as well as north?
No, and that would be a good way of
Well,
doing
that
it.
hospital that you showed, it has three directions, obviously, north, east and west on it.
Yeah, it did, and it quite did, but that wasn't by design. It was just purely the nature of that orientation of the roof. But it actually has worked really well because of essentially the hospital operates as a nursing home, and so there's people there drawing energy all of the time. Really predictable. So it's a great spot for solar. One of the two reasons, obviously, we stuck to 99 is one is that once we set into 100, we're at LGCs, and the other is the transformer out the front was operating at its capacity. So it's since been replaced. So that's the solar hot water bulk buy we've just done. A range of other activities that we've done revolve around a little fund we've set up called the Perpetual Energy Fund, and I'm sure you've seen other variations. It started out as a rolling fund, and the idea being with donations and money we raised, we would lend it back out to community groups to improve their energy use. What we discovered that most of the community groups in Yak weren't interested in taking on debt, mainly because they were their incomes were so unreliable. So we've now arrived at the viewpoint we just provided as grants, but we've worked quite closely with the community groups. So this is a public hall in Yackandandah, and we're just replacing all of the lights to LEDs. And it's provided two really nice outcomes. One of those outcomes is that it has obviously reduced the energy use, and the lights start up straight away. But we've been able to put them on with dimmers as well. So you can imagine in a building that has performance, being able to change the lights and dim and control and turn them on and off quickly has added a real functionality. We're just in the process of organising to put solar and batteries on the public hall as well, and that will be a donation arrangement. Interestingly, we've helped the sports park. It's a basketball stadium, cricket ground and other bits and pieces, tennis courts. They replaced all their high bays with LED lights and did a whole range of other things. They changed some security lighting and other bits and pieces. And they've, after 12 months and the hard work of one person who's taken time to go and watch what's going on using the UBI that they were given. They've reduced their energy use by 30% in 12 months, and they were operating in the red the previous year, and now they're well back into the black. And so in terms of organisational viability, it's meant a whole range of different things for a volunteer group. We're just getting ready to change their tennis court lights over to LEDs as well, which is pretty exciting. So the other organisation that Totally Renewable Yackandandah went and spoke with was AusNet Services, and obviously they're a huge influence over our ability to achieve 100%. And same thing really again, we went to this organisation, the main base for AusNet in northeast Victoria is in Benalla. We went and met with some of their senior engineers and floated this idea, and you could see the sort of scratching their heads really. But at the same time, AusNet was starting to realise that there was a bit of a change going on, and that bit of a change is obviously you and I were installing solar panels, we were reducing our energy use with smart appliances, we were starting to think about batteries, and the question's really clear there, that if everybody starts to prepare themselves and eventually connects to batteries, we've got this big expensive asset that would become stranded and useless, and AusNet is the owner of that asset. So their interest in approaching Yackandandah, and when we approached them, was to understand whether or not there was a way that we could both work together to help us achieve our goal and to help them create value out of the existing asset that's there. And no doubt there'll be some more questions about that. The photo there is an interesting one. It's on a swirl line on the edge of Yackandandah on Sanatorium Road. And we've got quite a few problems right across the AusNet network, and you can say the Australian network, where swirl lines have been put in place in the 50s and 60s because it was a really cheap way of getting power to houses, and essentially running an extension cord across paddocks and connecting people, which worked great when power came from one source, went to houses, and essentially you're running a radio and a kettle and maybe a toaster. But the way we use electricity and the fact we can generate means these systems are no longer relevant. In the national energy market, it's not possible under the policy settings to disconnect swirl lines and yeah, so it's literally it's an extension cord across the paddocks, single wire earth return, single cable just runs there. They add
end of the line basically.
Yeah. So when they go up a little valley, there's no point in installing a big network. They just run the little cable. Yeah. And they're actually quite dangerous too. They have a habit of causing fires. So, you know, there's some incentive to get rid of them. On another swirl line on the edge of Yackandandah, there's a piece of research happening with University of Technology Sydney being funded by ARENA. And that piece of research is really examining the way in which we can use microgrids, which I'll talk about in a little while, but using batteries, solar and control systems to reduce the pressure on the swirl line. And it's the voltage problem that we talked about before, that if we can control the way that electricity is being transmitted, we can then influence how much life we can get out of these swirl lines. Interestingly, it's actually cheaper now in some circumstances for AusNet to cut down the swirl lines and give the people who are otherwise connected solar batteries and control systems and a generator and operate it for them. No charge to them except they continue to pay a service charge. And,
so can I just ask a question? The swirl lines are running out of the town, not into the town?
Yeah. Yeah. So normally, when you have a concentration of population, your electricity network's stronger there because you've got more people needing it.
Which way they're coming in.
Yeah. So these go up valleys. They go into narrow, sparsely populated spaces. Yeah. So it's cheaper to give people solar batteries on marginal swirl lines now. It's just you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to disconnect people from the network. They can choose to disconnect. So
does that mean as an individual, could the whole valley go, we're going to disconnect together? They can. Okay. But can they then use the bit of the line that they need to connect each other?
No.
That's where it stinks. Sorry.
There is a community in New South Wales is attempting to buy the network. That's conceivable. But the general view of AusNet is that if you want to buy it from us, then those constricted networks go right ahead. But there's all sorts of problems around the expertise, the insurance, the maintenance, and so forth. Yeah. But it's a good question, and it will be likely that we'll be getting lots more groups trying to do that. Yeah. So the Regulated Energy Services arm of AusNet Services owns all of the transmission, so transporting electricity from generation to major points of use. And that's right across Victoria. They also own distribution lines pretty much all of eastern Victoria, so from Melbourne heading east. So a pretty chunky part of the distribution. We also, Mondo don't. AusNet Services also operates some gas networks on the west side of Melbourne as well. Mondo Power, instead, however, is a subsidiary of the Commercial Energy Services of AusNet, and the Commercial Energy Services are mainly operating with commercial metering services. And so that's where that sits. How am I going for time? Is everyone happy to keep going? Yeah. Not bored yet? Okay. So out of the conversation we started having with AusNet Services, which eventually became Mondo Power, that subsidiary, we had a whole series of focus groups in Yackandandah. We had lots of meetings back and forth. We had inputs of various experts in the field from overseas and in Australia. And one of the end results was that we ended up with a renewable energy journey, which I'm about to talk to you, a 5-stage roadmap. And a core part of the thinking is the necessity to have some sort of device that was able to operate as a controller. And the end result of that thinking was the creation of a device called an UBI. And an UBI essentially is a little micro computer that sits on every house that's participating. And it has the ability to control circuits in the house remotely. It's connected by Wi-Fi and it can be 3 or 4G. It also is DRED enabled. DRED stands for Demand Response Enabled devices. So that can be air conditioners, it can be hot water services, it can be pool pumps, it can be modern fridges, anything that is designed so you can operate it remotely. So this is the portal of a UBI. It's the thing that you can connect to wherever you are or wherever you've got connection for your tablet or phone. The point of it really, I suppose, is to put in front of people how they're using energy on their home. So this is taken on a home that's got a battery system. You can see the battery system's at 97% charged there. They've got generating at the moment 4.1 kilowatts of solar. They're exporting the majority of that at just a small demand in the home. So that gives a little bit of insight into what's happening with your home energy use, generation and storage. It also keeps a record of what's happened yesterday and the last 7 days, and also a record of that as an Excel spreadsheet as well. And there's other bits and pieces mixed up in with that. The other thing, knowing that YAC is intending to be 100%, of all of the so of this home, they were currently operating on 100%. There'll be a date on it somewhere. I can't see it now. This is while it was still sunny. So they were operating on 100% there. They started in October last year. This Mondo community here, that's of all of the houses which have this UBI device, they're using 27% of their electricity supply is from local generation. And so obviously our goal is to get both those two sitting at 100%. So that's it. That's the portal of the Ubi device. I'll talk some more about it so that it makes some more sense. So with Mondo, we worked through a 5-stage roadmap. And stage 1 really was what we were already doing. You are getting an uptake of solar on rooftops. People are making a decision it's time to do it. They were sick of their bills or they wanted to respond to climate change. One of the problems we're starting to see right across the network is because so many people are seeing value in doing this, we're starting to get those problems with the voltage spikes and inverters shutting down. So that's really essentially a business as usual, that scenario there, stage 1. So stage 2 is what we did last year. We were essentially creating what we called a solar microgrid. So we've added solar and we've added an Ubi and we've added inverters that are ready to be able to take batteries. And the Ubi really now starts to give us insight into how electricity is being used in the home and right across the network of Yackandandah. And Ubi provides information to people if their solar, if their inverters shut down, or the solar panels need a clean, or it has the potential, hasn't been enacted yet, to start to say to people, well, if you were to buy a battery, you would pay it off based on the continuing existing use in 5 years or 7 years or whatever their return on investment would be. So really it's starting to prepare a smart local grid to be able to optimise the way the electricity is being used locally. Am I going? Is everyone still awake? Still going too slow? Should I go quicker? No? Okay. So stage 3 really is this question of adding a battery, and you know, you've heard it heaps by commentators that the price of batteries and the quality of technology is becoming really favourable. And who knows when the right time is. One of the points of the UBI is to help people make really well-informed decisions about when the right time is for them. So stage 3 is essentially the addition of a battery.
Could supercapacitors be a component of that eventually?
Yep, the supercapacitor could be a battery. Yeah. I'm really excited about supercapacitors. Yeah.
I think there's no point going to the fancy things. What about electric vehicles? So the house is going to use 20 kilowatt hours a day, say, if it's a user, and the car might use 20 kilowatt hours, then you might have a 40 kilowatt hour battery or a 100 kilowatt hour battery. So if you've got a 100 kilowatt hour battery in your car, what do you need a supercomputer?
Yeah, what's actually Francis here is from Wangaratta and is very passionate enthusiast about EVs. And it was a conversation we were just having. At the moment, EVs aren't able to interact with a household energy system. Oh, they're not allowed to feed back into a household energy system. But when that happens, absolutely.
What do you mean they're not allowed?
So the rules in Australia, no, I beg your pardon, the car manufacturers don't allow export from the car back to a house or back to...
Because that was the whole way Tesla worked out some of their stuff originally. I wasn't aware.
Yeah, originally they did, and originally Nissan did the same thing. And neither of those are injecting back into grids anyway.
You can do it in Japan, but not here. In Japan, but not here.
You're saying if you have the right inverter and the right car...
Well, if you buy a Nissan in Japan, you can also buy a vehicle to the home charger.
So the cars are protected.
I knew the technology was there, that was why.
The cars are protected from exporting. But it's a really nice solution if you can have a small battery and be able to also use your car. The problem with the Tesla is you can charge it for free at a Tesla charger, so you go and fill up and then run your home.
Currently, they'll change it, don't worry. As the numbers go up, they won't, their deals will change to make sure that they...
Isn't the issue though that the degradation you get in your car from flattening and reusing your battery means it's just not cost justifiable at the moment?
Yeah, that's
the
right.
life of the battery is such that
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of a supercapacitor is that you have a kind of basically infinite number of discharges that you can do. But at the moment, lithium batteries have quite a defined discharge volume.
Well, gas with whole operation, what you're doing, each has to be different.
It was the case that batteries were of concern originally, but European experience has shown that the Tesla batteries will last at least 15 years in the car. So probably a lifetime of the car.
I'm having a conversation with a fellow at the moment that's busy trying to do a 10-star development, and he wants to understand whether or not they need to stay connected to the grid. And it's a difficult question to answer because, well, probably not. It depends on their enthusiasm to sometimes run out of power and potentially being able to drive down to the petrol station and fill your car and come back and plug it in. We get a lot of feedback from people who say, well, I'm just going to disconnect from the grid. And it's a really interesting discussion, which obviously AusNet is very interested in. There is some really important questions in there about equity that's already built into the grid. And obviously at the moment in Hawthorn, we all pay the same amount of money for the supply of electricity to what you do in Corryong or at Mount Hotham or wherever else. And the other part of it is that obviously people who can't afford to be able to have batteries, and whether that is people who are on low incomes or dependent on pensions or because they're big users of electricity, that those people will be the ones that end up shouldering perhaps the cost of maintaining the grid, or otherwise there's some sort of deterioration in the quality of energy supply. And so the market is being very careful of the AEMO and AER thinking very carefully about what the regulation looks like to make sure that everyone is brought along in an affordable way. Some interesting questions in there. So stage 4, and it's something that Tri is putting a lot of thought into, is adding a electricity retailer. So we're creating microgrids in Yackandandah, and in Yackandandah that means we've got solar, battery and control devices, and we're concentrating on each transformer, and obviously we're working to try and create each of those microgrids somewhere heading towards 100%. And we're going to interconnect those microgrids using the existing grid to create one big mini-grid in Yackandandah. In order for us to be able to value local generation of electricity, we have realised quite quickly we need to have a common retailer. And so one way of managing that is you get a supportive retailer, and the community of Newstead has done that with Diamond Energy. In Yackandandah, we're much more heading down the path of developing a community energy retailer, but doing it as a white label for an existing retailer. But the intent being to be able to share electricity locally and to be able to broker that transfer of electricity from one person to another or one business to another. And there's different ways that could be resolved. So stage 4 really is about introducing the community energy retailer. We anticipate starting trading in February of next year, and we're doing it in such a way that it will be reproducible across Victoria, but we're concentrating at the moment just in northeast Victoria.
So can I ask that, is that voluntary or mandatory for that for the residents in town?
Oh no, it's got to be voluntary.
Okay,
yeah, it's got to be voluntary. But we've had some really nice experience in Yackandandah that if you can demonstrate the value of contributing to a local organisation, you know, local employment, money gets put back into community projects, just the value of taking things on.
Economies of scale, I would imagine, for residents.
Economies of scale is a really interesting one, and so it's why we just couldn't do it in Yak. It had to be a broader geographic area. So that's stage 4. In that pathway, we think we can get to somewhere between 70 and 90% supply of local energy in Yackandandah, local electricity in Yackandandah. And the 70 to 90 is about difference between summer and winter, essentially. And so stage 5...
That's mostly solar?
I beg your pardon?
That's mostly solar?
All solar.
All solar.
Yeah. And so then stage 5 addresses that leftover portion to try and stop using it straight from the national energy market. So we are in the early stages of starting a solar farm, building a solar farm. When I say early stages, we're working out the finance model and creating the entity that will be able to manage the investment that happens. In other communities, that might be about hydro, it might be about wind turbines, it might be about wave, who knows what else it might be about. The other part of that is obviously the creation of a grid-scale storage as well. And so we're hoping to resolve that in Yackandandah in two ways. One, just adding a big battery, and the other is there is a number of pumped hydro opportunities on the edge of Yackandandah. So we're working out how we utilise those as well.
When you get to that stage, how does AusNet all get virtually any money? Like if you're just producing it all, moving it around, using it all.
That's a great question. So AusNet make money from portions of the daily service charge, and they make money from the volume. About half the volume of each tariff goes to AusNet to pay for the grid. And it's actually a really interesting question for a retailer. How does a retailer make money? Because if you've got houses that are essentially 100% for a good portion of the year, they're not buying anything of the thing that's being sold.
No, but they're selling your power.
But if you're using, you get privileged with all your own power. You don't pay anybody for that.
Yeah, but if you're exporting some of that power, AusNet and AusNet taking a cut, is that part of what's going on?
Yeah, that's right. And so AusNet, no one in the energy market really knows the answer to your question. But if AusNet and other network providers become integral into this solution, then there is potential for communities to do well out of it because they're in control of their power and they're using mostly their own power. And AusNet still does well out of it because they are an integral part of the kind of conceptual battery, which is the grid at the moment. It's actually sort of a really interesting thing. One of the values, of course, of staying connected to the grid is that when you've got excess power, you can export it and it can be used by somebody else. As soon as you disconnect, go stand alone, you can't do that. I had another response, but it's gone from my mind, but I'll try and remember it.
Our outreach, perhaps? Our outreach?
Yeah. So at the moment, one of the things that's possible with the microgrid that we've developed in Yackandandah is that it could be islanded. So if the whole network went out, that microgrid still could function. The trouble is that energy market rules prevent it from happening. And they prevent it from happening because of the safety implication of having one part of the grid live and the rest of it not. So workers might come and work, or a householder might try and do something. So that's all resolvable, and I'll talk about that some more.
Is there much pressure to change that at the moment?
No, I wouldn't say.
Because that's one of the big arguments as to why you'd get off the grid, is because the uncertainty of the grid just seems to be increasing more and more. And therefore, if you can't island yourself, then, you know...
It won't happen. Especially under the D.
No. Yeah, well, I don't know if the energy supply is getting more and more unreliable. I mean, if you were to go to South Australia, that might be a different response there, and that's a whole another story. But certainly one of the advertised values of having batteries is your ability to be out. You can island your house. It's just more problematic to island an area, perhaps connected to a transformer. Certainly, there was a guy, Nigel, in one of the microgrids who put a message out on Facebook when everyone else was complaining about the power outage in the morning. Does everyone want to come over and have a toastie and a cup of coffee, because we're running normally.
So just a quick question, if it was to be islanded, would that be at the demarcation of the transmission to the distribution potentially? Or?
So there's a couple of responses. It could be at the individual transformer, or it could be the transformer of the feeder into town.
I guess I'm talking about between AusNet, between their transmission service and their distribution service.
No, less likely that. It would more likely be at local feeders. The transformers there.
On the reliability, Melbourne had blackouts in the 1972 on coal. So it makes you wonder what's actually reliable, and they then built Newport as a gas burner to try and make it more reliable. We've been around this merry-go-round before, it's not necessarily clear cut.
Well, I mean, that was apparent during summer too, wasn't it, with the volume of coal outages that took place. So there's the journey. I suppose we anticipate by 2022 being net 100% renewable, and the way we're going to achieve that is by building a solar farm big enough to cover the volume of electricity we use in Yak, and then in 2022 we anticipate being 100% gross renewable.
So that's 100% average over the year sort of thing. Sometimes you're exporting back
So
to
that's 100% net.
Yeah.
100% gross means all of the electricity we use in Yak is generated locally.
And you're going to get to that. Okay.
How do you get it on in winter time when the solar yield is much less?
Yeah, so it's a combination of just having enough generation and storage locally. It's also, when you start to reduce your energy demand by 30%, like you can see the change happening. If we say that a hot water service uses up to 40% of a household's energy demand, if you change that and make it 5%, it's all those increments going on. And who knows whether we'll get there? We're giving it a shot.
Is wind power also in the mix?
Wind power could potentially be in the mix if we realise we're not going to be able to do it all locally, but the wind resource in Yackandandah and Indigo Shire is very poor.
Because of the hills.
Because of the hills. Okay, so there's just a little bit of a picture. I suppose one of the things that we've realised in the work we've done, and I'm talking about Totally Renewable Yackandandah, the scale of the change we need to respond to the need to decarbonise is so big, and the complexity of that task means that it's unlikely to be a few households here and there, and it's unlikely to be a few boutique installers, and it's unlikely to be a little community changing it. It's about whole change in action and thinking for government, for business, for industry, for civil society in general. And so TRI has worked really hard to be apolitical, and it's worked really hard to not ostracise people or make arguments with people. We just want to help people come along when the time is right, and to give them the information they need to make good decisions. And so I'm going to sort of jump across a little bit more to some of the more broad things happening, but the vision in Yackandandah, I suppose, and this is one of the what's called a naked microgrid deployment. This is the LG battery down the bottom there, and we're using this electronic inverter, which no doubt you've heard of, being Melbourne based, and a Fronius inverter. And that over there, that device there is the UBI, and it relies on connection to a Wi-Fi, or if that's not possible, 3G or 4G. And the intent really, I suppose, in Yackandandah is for us to make the solar and battery solution as ubiquitous as backyard cricket, and hence the picture.
Why do you need two inverters?
You don't need two inverters. At the moment, there is still an early entry to market with good quality hybrid inverters. So a hybrid inverter. So that's the solar inverter there, and that's the battery inverter there. So this thing just changes electricity from DC of the solar. And
so you actually have your panels in series. So you actually feeding high voltage DC into the inverter.
Yeah.
Why not do it in our installation? We have groups of panels connected to DC and feed them straight into the battery via the SP Pro. So we only have one inverter.
Yeah. So because we're trying to get people who are not yet ready to go to batteries, we were making an option available for them just to go to solar, hence the Fronius, and then this could become an option later on. Yes, and so there is certainly solar and battery inverters that are one unit that we could have used and we have used. Solar Edge being a really good example of that, and it performs really well.
Whether the batteries can export to the grid. So basically, rather than having one large battery, at the moment you've got a number of batteries, a battery at a number of households, and they can feed into the grid at night.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But it appears that most people aren't that excited about using their battery, given that notion of limited number of cycles to provide to the grid. And when we get to a point that we're all using batteries to have that cycle limit, it's going to be a really nice way for the energy market to operate. And so it's probably worth just mentioning that one of the key roles of the UBI will be to start to enter households into the demand response, demand management portion of the grid. So at the moment we have these spikes at various times of the year, usually summer on a hot day, and the AMO are busy ring up a whole bunch of their big customers and say, can you reduce your power demand tomorrow? The UBI enables that scenario to happen, but instead of it being a big user where you get a big turn down, you just ask a whole bunch of people electronically via a text message or however it happens, or they can just voluntarily say, yep, do whatever you want, but give me the reward for it. So what that means is that they might, for example, reduce their air conditioning demand by a small amount, maybe 1 or 2 degrees, reduces their demand for that house. But if you aggregate that across a whole bunch of houses, you get a useful result. And at the moment, there's a test going on in New South Wales with swimming pool pumps, and they're doing exactly that. They're inviting everybody to turn down their swimming pool pumps or turn them off, and it's providing a really meaningful reduction in energy demand across the grid.
Which product is the UBI?
It's Mondo's.
Mondo's own proprietary.
Yep. We'll go back to that nice picture. So, at the moment, Mondo Power is now working on models to not just do this in Yackandandah, but to do it across whole regions. And so there is effort going on right across the Hume region, which is 15 councils. It starts up at Towong Shire, just beneath the Snowy there, comes down as far as Seymour, and essentially joins the Murray to the mountains, so Alpine, Indigo, and so forth. And so the intention is that instead of just piecemeal additions of renewables, that it gets done in really well through integrated ways. And it's happening in different ways. We've been very fortunate in our region to have representation by a federal MP called Cathy McGowan, and she's doing a terrific job at bringing people together rather than dividing them. And she has been a huge supporter for community energy in our region, and the Victorian Government has just awarded the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning $300,000 to create a Hume renewable energy strategy. And the point of that is, how do we do renewable energy well in a way that picks up the value of renewable energy, that people can make money out of it, so developers, whoever that is, Pacific Hydro, that the people who are near and around those installations aren't unduly affected by it, and that they draw benefit from it, and that the value of the land isn't compromised. And so we're seeing across the Hume region at the moment some really big questions about why would we put really good quality farmland beneath solar panels and then affect the yield, the agricultural yield of that land. So there's some big thinking that's just starting. Unfortunately, it would have been better to have started 5 years ago, but it's just starting, and it's really quite exciting to see what's happening. So someone's just been employed to write that renewable energy strategy by the Department of Environment. It's going to be quite interesting to see what happens. Also, Mondo Power has just applied to the federal government via the Regional Growth Fund for $24 million, and the purpose of that application is to build a series of clusters of renewable energy activity across the Hume region. And essentially that means getting little microgrids of businesses introducing solar batteries and control systems so that they can become much more self-sufficient, and part of the broader question about how do we get electricity to everybody by reducing the size of the asset, reducing the cost of the asset, by not being reliant on energy coming from somewhere else, that we're actually generating it and using it and storing it locally. The other thing that's part of that regional growth fund is energy, is trial hydrogen plants. So the point being that there is a growing thought that one of the possibilities is that instead of trucks and trains in rural and regional areas being powered by electricity, they're probably more likely to be powered by hydrogen. And so the attempt is to try and start integrating hydrogen into the main transport corridors, and that they will become the feeder for that to happen. And obviously there's some opportunities there around export of hydrogen too, once we all start to understand how that works.
Are there some small, efficient hydrogen-making units?
I don't know, but these are going to be big ones. Yeah. And one of the interesting things, and it's probably irrelevant because Mondo owns a gas network as well, you can put up to about 15% hydrogen into an existing natural gas line. And so it does mean that there is already partially a distribution network for hydrogen there. But obviously you want to be trying to generate hydrogen in places that you can also generate the electricity renewably.
Yeah, Moreland's planning to hydrogen power their garbage trucks in about 4 years.
Read that, yeah.
They say there's an off-the-shelf sort of hydrogen unit you can buy. You know, it sort of actually arrives in a container, and you plug in the solar and the
water tap
source, and you know, it's not that hard.
Sorry.
A hydrogen generating plant, I suspect, will be a wonderfully infinitely controllable means of overcoming the overvoltage problem when the sun's shining.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's another means of storing electricity, absolutely.
People should be careful to look at hydrogen in two ways. One is driving fuel cells, which emit no carbon, and the other one is burning it in an internal combustion engine. The problem with that is that if it's a co-generation like a carbon fuel, you'll still get the CO2 problems. But the worst of it is that despite the mythology that if you burn hydrogen you only end up with water, in an internal combustion engine you also get oxides of nitrogen, which is a problem.
Yeah, obviously fuel cells are the pathway that's preferred.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no point in inventing another means of creating carbon.
No.
I'm wondering regarding people involved in terms of reducing their consumption. So I'm wondering, during the last number of years that the project has been going on, then have the people looked at their house energy consumption pattern, including that before you mentioned about things to the individual swimming pool. So I'm just wondering, one is about their house energy consumption pattern and how to reduce it, and two is changing the lifestyle of it. Say, for example, enjoying a communal swimming pool more than as one other, right? And in winter time, you go with the night.
Yeah, so it would be fair to say I don't think Tri's done an amazing job at reducing energy consumption. One of the thoughts that we clearly have in our mind is that the provision of the UBI gives people really good insight into how electricity is being used. So obviously we could all go into someone's house and say, well, close your curtains and turn your heater down to half and do all of those things, the visualisation of the portal of Uber gives really good insight, and we've seen that in the performance of the Yackandandah Sports Park, where they've reduced their consumption by 30%. And it's why we also are putting great emphasis on the question of hot water. What it appears is that most of us only change our hot water system when the old one dies. As compared with solar electricity, mostly people were buying that brand new. They didn't already have an existing solar electricity. People only replace their hot water service when the old one dies. So our goal is not just to do a kind of a short hot water bulk buy, we need to do a long-term one, and we need to help people understand the immediate value of anything. So no, we need to do it better, and I agree. The other part of that question is there's been quite a strong thought you know it all anyway, but the best thing to do with your solar electricity is you work really hard at reducing your demand and then work out what size system you put on. But actually, given the change in, for example, the use of EVs, it's probably best to put the biggest system you can possibly afford on and then reduce your usage. And the reason for doing that is that then you become able to make sure you can charge a battery as much as possible. And mostly AusNet's only letting people in single phase install 4.5 or 5 kilowatts anyway, so it's not a huge system. But
how much does an EV cost?
It doesn't. It's part of a package. Yeah.
I was interested in your whatever buy you call it,
the bulk buy.
Bulk buy, that's the word. Of the precus of the hot water, because they're absolutely fantastic way of doing it. The flat panels can't even close to compete with how good the tubes are for the solar hot water. But the issue has always been the quality and the price. So I'm interested to know where you're getting, where they're made in, what you think the quality is and how much they're costing.
Well, we think the quality of them is really good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Are they Chinese or are they other?
No, Japanese.
Ah, okay.
Japanese.
And is it,
but you know, at the end of the day, an electric storage hot water unit is a pretty bomb-proof device. It sits there, and it was designed in an era when we needed to use lots of electricity overnight to balance the fact that there was all this spare electricity.
Yeah.
It's not a smart way of doing hot water, but it's a really reliable way of doing hot water and simple.
I might be wrong, but I think I recall there's a mob in South Australia who are using an Apricus type hot water system. They raise it up a metre or so off the roof, and they purposely have a reflective roof underneath so that the tubes are getting direct sunlight and reflected, and thereby get a lot more output. And then they use that to run some sort of a heat engine that can generate power.
Yeah,
but
just steam generator. Now, it sounds like a really logical thing to do. It looks like I'm getting the wind up.
I thought control the questions.
Oh, okay. There was, so I'm happy to keep answering questions. Yeah. So the Regional Growth Fund, we were supposed to have, Mondo was supposed to have found out whether we'd succeeded with an expression of interest on the 18th of June. So we haven't found that out from the federal government yet. But if we succeed with the expression of interest, there will then be a 3-month period of going around to all of the businesses that were buying into the $108 million worth of renewable energy activity across Hume, and then hoping to win that $24 million worth of grant funding to proceed. So at the same time that's happening, you may have heard that ARENA had a program running called the Distributed Energy Resources Fund, and the purpose of that was to allow electricity companies, be that retailers or research organisations or distribution and transmission networks to experiment with renewable energy policy and legislation. Now at the moment, largely the policy is set up to support the incumbent arrangement of electricity supply, and there's a whole bunch of new questions that need to be resolved with legislation to equitably and appropriately reward the preferred behaviours. And so Mondo is submitting a grant application to the Distributed Energy Resources Fund with ARENA to trial different scenarios of policy and legislation, so just a trial, to see what the behavioural impact is on the market. And hopefully that can be applied to the various bits of work being done through the Regional Growth Fund. So that's the intent.
I'd just like, Mr. Chairman, some of us have to leave early. I don't want to be a party pooper, but we need to leave early.
Just sneak
we'll
off.
Just sneak out this way.
Just sneak
Thanks,
out.
Francis. Thanks.
Go for another 20 minutes if you like, or 15 minutes.
Yep.
Does that incorporate the accredited?
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So this version, this is a second version of Ubi. It doesn't have a market meter in it.
So it's still standalone to the accredited meter.
Correct. So you would still need, and there's a couple of responses to that. So you still need to have your existing smart meter working in combination with that. The Ubi 3.0, see, the Ubi 3.0 will have a market meter in it, and that will be able to be used as the billing meter in a commercial setting. But at the moment, there's no contestable.
That's the act name that you're aiming for, isn't it? That's the in-game services in some ways, isn't it?
So it is a potential goal.
Because at the moment, the way I see this is that's the monetary unit, like hundreds of others on the market,
Yep.
accredited meter. But if they actually incorporate the regulatory requirement of that
Yep.
meter in there, then they actually capture the market.
Yep. And that's right, and that can happen now at a commercial level,
Yeah.
but at a residential level, there's no contestable metering. So what that means is everybody still has to have a smart meter, and there's a whole bunch, and that will be the case until 2021, at which time that will be reviewed. And there's a whole bunch of questions about how smart.
Going to the meter of choice type thing that was talked about in other states, for instance.
It's possible,
Yeah.
or that we recognise that the smart meter hasn't achieved its goals,
Yeah,
and we say, well, what's now available to do the job?
Meter of choice type thing.
Alan first.
Just confirming before, when you said in the microgrid, when there's power transferring or one person's selling it to someone else, does AusNet get half of that fee? Is that what you were saying?
So as soon as electricity goes through a national energy meter,
Right.
the NMI, the AusNet gets their portion of the tariff. Yeah.
Which
So,
is 50%, is it? I'm just not sure what tariff.
so it's about 50%. So it's about 15 cents goes to AusNet.
Okay. So
And the other
the
15
person selling it effectively gets 15 cents rather than his
Yeah.
normal 9.
It's a really interesting question, and it ties into this question about ARENA and distributed energy resources and legislation. So at the moment, there is only most energy companies are just providing one tariff for network access. And the community of Newstead has been able to negotiate with Powercore a local area tariff, and the way that that's actually being expressed is not as a volumetric, but it's just a subscription, annual subscription, and they've done it for the postcode of Newstead. Mondo is pushing quite hard with AusNet, and Yak is doing the same in support of the retailer to say if your energy is only going from this house to that house, should you pay the cost of the whole grid?
Just clarifying, you understand that AusNet's a network and the others are just about some retailer, two distinctions, that's basically. So, I mean, basically Mondo isn't a retailer at this point.
AusNet and Mondo aren't allowed to be retailers.
That's what I'm saying, their network, so what you're talking about is a retailing function in effect. And
No, I think you were asking about the network portion of
you're talking
energy
about
tariff.
you're talking about tariffs on the network side of things.
Yeah, but half the tariff goes to the network.
A charge, yeah, a charge.
There's not.
I think
Just getting back to a very basic level in Yackandandah, obviously you have different wealth in the different parts of the community. How did the pension type people, how did they become part of it?
So the portal that I showed you before was a pension, the household of pensioners, and they bought into this system because they felt like they had the money, they were newly retired, and they wanted to be able to know that they were controlling their energy costs. And so they're in negative territory with their energy bill now. It's a big conundrum. The bulk buy that we did had the attractive option of interest-free. Then we're about to launch into another bulk buy, it won't be interest-free. So in terms of how would somebody who's a pensioner buy into it, there was no upfront requirement for payment, and it was interest-free. So as long as that system was sized well, they would be spending less money than they already were on electricity. Yeah. So that possibility wasn't necessarily easy to communicate. And people easy to communicate. No. So people are quite rightly probably still sceptical about the potential to achieve that.
But still, with a lowish rate of interest, you'd still pay it off probably over 5 years. So
that's right.
That won't have a major impact on the field.
So the Shire of Maroondah is currently undertaking a series of solar bulk buys right across Victoria, and they're focused on pensioners, and the maximum size they can install is 3 kilowatt. Maroondah, and it's called the Solar Savers Program, and so it depends on your council buying into the program, but essentially you're allowed to buy up to 3 kilowatts, and there is a Solar Savers low interest loan available through Bank Australia. So I think it's 4.75% interest.
They're not tied to a Minigrids that much, it's just purely installation.
Purely solar.
Looking at a new project within the metropolitan area, so in other words, an island totally renewable, start from the scratch. Why would you have poles and wires? This is within the AusNet area. Why don't you do starting? Because there's public transport, education, medical facilities, business and retail centres within easy reach. Mini solar buses can go backwards and forwards to avoid the traffic problems that we're getting now. If we allow another 10,000 cars on the road in the Yarra Valley, forget about trying to do it, it'll be just, the cost will be enormous. So what I'm saying is your system go through a mini-grid. Can the mini-grid grow as you go along? Because this development will be 10 years. Or now they're starting a few blocks now, 200-300 blocks. Eventually it'll be about 3,000 blocks. Right? Why would you do it otherwise? And you're saying what you do for families, young people, low income, etc., inclusionary zoning, which means that a percentage of any of those which are built there will go for low income household. So 10% to 20%. It's been done overseas. We're not doing it here because of negative gear. We need more funds. 3 levels of government to put in to do exactly that. So nobody, no single mum or fathers or whatever, be kicked out. And be low cost rental forever. Yeah. You don't buy and sell for money. You're there to provide a service to the whole community. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Including community gardens where you grow the food, you can store the food, you can cook the food, freeze it. Yeah. So and you can get involvement by the whole community.
So when Totally Renewable Yackandandah conceived of our goal, we were really just thinking about renewable energy, and obviously.
That, but I'm talking about starting afresh on a large area.
Yeah, but what's happening in towns now, and Phillip Island is an example of that. Hepburn Shire is a terrific example of that, where communities are thinking about renewable energy just as one part of the reformation about it, and so the project is much bigger because we're now talking about what you're talking about as what does housing need to look like, what does the equity and access question look like, what does the opportunity for First Australians look like, all of those questions, and I think that they're crucial, and they will come in as we get more sophisticated in what it is we're doing. And I say we as in all not everyone. No, I agree with you.
Just a quick political one. What if Liberals get in? How's that going to affect things?
Well, and Try's worked really hard at being apolitical. I mean, at the end of
Yeah,
the...
but they've said they're going to stop all this targets and all the rest of it. It's going to take a lot of...
Well, there's an inevitability about the roll-on of renewable energy. It's possible things will just go slower.
Sorry.
Things will just go slower. I mean, solar panels will continue to get cheaper because they make sense to people. Batteries will continue to get more affordable because they make sense.
When I arrived at this meeting, I had a kind of a conundrum in my mind, and that is that there doesn't seem to be a high level of compatibility between the objectives of Mondo Power and AusNet Services. Now, what brought this to my mind? You talked about the overvoltage situation that you can get, and that you suffered in the Yackandandah project. And you then talked about going to a meeting with AusNet Services. I think I would like to have been a fly on the wall at that meeting. I guess my question is there really a good relationship, so to speak, of cooperation between AusNet Services and Mondo Power? Or does AusNet Services see you as the kind of guys that they'd rather push out into the back room? I'm not trying to be rude or cheeky.
Tash is my boss. So when Tri first approached AusNet Services, Mondo Power didn't exist. But it would be fair to say they also approached us because they were out looking for a community to start forming microgrids. They were out looking for that, and they examined a range of communities, and there was no particular need to do a microgrid in Yackandandah for AusNet Services, because a really good place to start doing microgrids is in a place where there's a problem with the network. And there wasn't in Yackandandah. But they came to Yackandandah because there was an unhappiness with the energy supply. People were happy, and there was a group of people that were already pushing this ambition. So it's really clear that if all of the energy providers, all of the network companies don't start thinking about renewable energy, the value of their assets is going to diminish, because everyone who can afford it is going to buy a battery because it makes sense to do that. It's maybe not yet financially, but certainly environmentally. And there's a whole range of other benefits in terms of being independent of power outages and so forth. But it's very clear that Kodak provide a beautiful example when a technology company makes a decision not to follow the trend. And so they have to, all the network companies have to do this. There's no choice. It's just AusNet seems to have done it early.
So if I may just follow up on that. So would the strength, if you like, of the umbilical cord between the two organisations be, for example, that doing what you're doing is going to reduce costs of augmenting the distribution network to compensate for growth?
So obviously, if Yackandandah becomes less and less dependent on the network, the size of the pipeline that supplies it can get smaller. Now, if that's not going to be very much saving for a company the size of AusNet, but if you do it everywhere, it then becomes relevant. And it'd be fair to say that the organisation of AusNet is full of engineers and who are quite, dare I say, quite conservative, and so they like to know what's going to happen before the change takes place. And Mondo has been deliberately set up to be innovative and be somewhat separate and not be constrained by that kind of very careful thinking that's occurred. And you see it a lot in the writing around renewable energy, that the distribution can either happen well and gradually, or it's going to happen suddenly and problematically. And so I guess Mondo and AusNet are trying to see it happen well and gradually, and involve everybody, and whether that's Yackandandah or Benalla or Wangaratta or Violet Town or Euroa or all of the other towns in here.
Didn't you say Mondo is owned by AusNet?
Yeah.
So that if they're owned by the same people, they've got a...
Doesn't mean to say they're friends.
There's a creative tension in there.
Had you with your father?
Creative.
Matt, how would you compare what you're doing in Yak with what's been done in Newstead? Specifically, what have you done with the people who are dubious or don't want to join in or whatever? And secondly, what are you doing, like Newstead is going to charge an access fee and nothing for the electrons? And you have a different...
So, no, they're still going to be charging for the electrons, is my understanding, but they're not going to be charging a network tariff in there. So they're separating out the network tariff and the retailer tariff.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be charging the network tariff, they're going to be charging a subscription.
Is that the change just later?
I don't think so.
So isn't it something like $500 a year?
Yeah, but that's just the network
charge.
Yeah.
And then you only pay for electricity above a certain amount, I think.
Yeah.
You get quite a lot free, I thought was the original plan.
And then the people who don't want to opt in?
So rather than debating around Newstead, there is a program called Son and Flat, which is much more based on a mobile phone arrangement that you get an estimate of how much power you want to use for the year, and then the idea being that you just pay a flat amount for electricity for the year, but you've got to come to the arrangement with your own solar and your own battery, and it's got to be compliant with Son and Flat. And then if you go above the threshold that you've bought into, you then pay a large amount for that over usage. Yeah. And you can buy different scales. So that system does exist, and it would be fair to say that it's probably where the energy market's going to go. Whether that's in Newstead, that's not my understanding, but I could be correct.
Newstead. So is this available now, this flat?
Zone flat is.
It's only available in the Power Core region in Newstead. And it's a trial period, and it's great that they've done it because it's put pressure on all the other network providers, including AusNet, to start to think about how they're going to respond. And the problem with it is it starts to unpack the social equity that's built into the supply of electricity. It's much like with Telstra and when you get a connection in Carlton, it's the same as what it is in Hoffman, whereas actually the real cost of that connection is very different. So if we start to say, well, we can charge these people less because they're not using the whole grid, you then start to say, well, they're doing that, but they're in Corriol, which costs a lot more than it does in Carlton. So maybe you should be paying for more for your connection in the first place. So
yeah, well, you talked about Indigenous people. There's a lot of energy poverty that needs to be considered amongst all this.
absolutely, yeah. And so that's why so much care is being taken in the way that the legislation is changed to make sure that it doesn't create perverse incentives that disadvantage people.
What if the Newstead, the new power station in Newport, what if the Newport power station was really a waste to energy plant, burning our rubbish?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean the options there. There's a whole bunch of questions about the carbon output of waste to energy, but if that's resolved,
it's not just carbon. There's a lot of other issues.
But I think that my thinking about it is the magnitude of change that we need to make means that we've got to throw it all up in the air and see what happens. And I mean, you just the temperatures that are happening in northern hemisphere at the moment, they're frightening, and yet we're still talking about whether or not the heritage rules allow a solar panel in a little historic town of Yackandandah. So forget about that. What about climate change? Let's get on with it.
Yeah, well, my other residence is in Castlemaine, and there the people are predicting that temperatures in central Victoria in the future will be something like the temperatures in Parachilna, which is Flinders Range.
Yeah.
So whatever Flinders Range is now looks like, central Victoria will look like.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get on with it.
Yep.
Do you want to add anything?
I didn't listen carefully at the beginning. So beside the climate of
So all of that 0.5 megawatt of solar we sold in Yackandandah was self-funded by the owners of the properties. It was done with an interest-free loan, so that makes it different. There is, when you go and listen to Damien Moyes at the ATA gathering that he was presenting at the other day, and he was talking about the return on investment on behind the meter installation, so a rooftop installation being 22%. You know, more normally gets spoken about as 15%. So the value of doing solar install on your own home is quite strong, and so we've kind of focused on that. And it responds to a question someone asked: how do we deal with people who aren't interested? We haven't spent too much time on the people who aren't interested, and it just so happens in Yackandandah that when we do audits of how people are thinking about it, we're sort of somewhere up there between 92 and 95% of support for our 100% goal. And we're not worrying about the 5% that are not interested in. Fortunately, they haven't made too much noise at this stage, at least publicly. There's been the odd nasty email and abuse.
So people automatically, I assume automatically, look at their house, look at their own house, at their own home, and evaluate the things that they could do in order to minimize or cut out energy loss, or cut out energy bill, unnecessary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you talk, when you listen to Andy Pearce, Alan Pearce talk about the opportunity in Australia, he talks about something like a 50% opportunity in energy reduction if we just start using energy in a smart way. So 50% is pretty big. We try, just through our Perpetual Energy Fund, just started hatching a bit of a program to support people on healthcare cards or pension cards to conduct a free energy audit and do, coupled with that, some energy efficiency training sessions, and that will be free to them. It's only early days for that.
Natasha, do you want to add anything to?
No, I think it was a really interesting discussion tonight, and everyone was very interested in the topic and
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.